For over a year, tensions have been escalating in southern China. A proposed extradition bill in 2019 would have let Beijing ship people detained in Hong Kong over to the mainland. This threat to Hong Kong's legal independence set off months of seemingly unending protests. As these protests grew, Beijing had two options: crack down on the protesters and risk a major internal crisis and likely international blowback, or try to minimize their significance and just wait for the unrest to naturally fade away. After weighing the risks, Beijing chose not to crack down, carefully moving its imperious gaze elsewhere and treating the chaos on the island as if it were a minor squabble. But this squabble matters. It matters far more than people in the West understand or Beijing wants to admit. Historically, Hong Kong has not been anything like the Hong Kong we know today. Hong Kong was really not much of anything at all. Hong Kong was a mostly ignored group of islands surrounding a harbor at the southeast edge of the Great Pearl River Delta, southern China's most densely populated coastal region. For centuries, wary mainland officials purposely kept this island barren, preferring to let Hong Kong rot as a harbor without a port rather than live as a staging ground for pirates or foreigners. Within the Delta, Canton, the modern-day city of Guangzhou, was the powerhouse and the nerve center of the region. So much trade was centralized in Canton that for a time, the city even housed the wealthiest man in the world. Groaning in Canton's shadow, Hong Kong's pre-colonial history is thin to non-existent. Hong Kong as we know it did not exist before the British arrived and transformed it into an imperial way station. Once free from the mainland's political chaos and strict control of commerce, Hong Kong was able to grow into a powerful node in world trade. After the First Opium War, Hong Kong was protected by the British Navy and endowed with the commercial, legal, and administrative tools of Europe's premier maritime state. As millions of people fled the mainland, Hong Kong gained a talented population of southern Chinese traders with generations of a maritime commercial culture behind them. Of course, the British still ruled Hong Kong like a colony. Social, economic, and political power was held by a tiny Western minority. But after World War II, Hong Kong integrated into the new international trade system set up by the United States. The city-state built off of its advantageous physical location and legacy British institutions to become the greatest port in southern China and eventually the world. So when Hong Kong was returned to China in 1997, many thought it would be the end of Hong Kong.
Today is cause for celebration, not sorrow.
The eyes of the world are on Hong Kong today. I wish you all a successful transition and a prosperous and peaceful future.
Then, the unexpectedly fast growth early on let some mutual delusion creep in. Beijing pretended Hong Kong would turn into any other city, and Hong Kong dreamed Beijing would turn into Hong Kong. But returning the island to the mainland was a poison pill for both sides. Old conflicts were destined to return. It was only a question of when the inevitable crisis would strike. The British only transitioned Hong Kong to relative independence and democracy during the handover negotiations with China in the 1980s. Pretty recent, but still long enough for Hong Kong to want to stay wealthy, independent, and newly democratic. China's vision was very different. It wanted to use Hong Kong as an intermediary before slowly integrating it back into the Chinese fold, ideally into a large but indistinguishable Chinese city. China's plan to turn the Pearl River Delta into an integrated region known as the Greater Bay Area is a plan to do just that to Hong Kong. Soon, Hong Kong was no longer the greatest port in the world or even in China. all the ports were opened and Hong Kong became one among many. The only thing that kept it unique was its Western legacy, its institutions, culture, businesses, and lifestyle that developed separately from the rest of China. Hong Kong residents now see their Hong Kong identity as more important than their Chinese identity. Now, with growth fading and social tensions rising, cities like Singapore, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen are all looking to take Hong Kong's business. None are as good as Hong Kong, but considering the situation on the mainland, Beijing is looking for something workable, not perfect. After allowing a year of destabilizing protest, the Chinese government refuses to look weak, so it passed a new national security law, even worse than the proposed extradition bill of 2019. Beijing's plan for 2020 and beyond is to crack down on the protests before they happen, before they get in the public eye, before foreigners get involved, and before anyone starts to question Chinese state authority. The only cost is what makes Hong Kong, Hong Kong.